Deep inside the most heavily restricted vaults of the United States Patent Office, there are documents that have remained unseen for almost a century. These were never failed concepts or discarded prototypes. They were designs considered far too effective. Picture a system so disruptive that if it appeared tomorrow, the entire worldwide energy structure would collapse overnight. Coal facilities, nuclear stations, endless stretches of high-voltage transmission networks, and the utility corporations worth $60 billion that dominate them would become useless in an instant. This was not about solar technology. It was not about wind generation. The subject was a concealed 1931 solid-state device created to draw enormous localized electrical energy straight from the atmosphere itself. It needed no combustible fuel, no mechanical movement, no sunlight. For decades, society has been conditioned to accept that electricity can only come from violent burning processes, unstable atomic reactions, or delicate and costly silicon systems. People were locked into dependence on energy monopolies that charge for every unit of power consumed. But what if the air surrounding every human being already contained an immense reserve of electrical energy, and the method to capture it had been perfected and buried more than 90 years ago using little more than copper mesh and simple chemical surface treatments? The science behind atmospheric extraction, the disappearance of the 1931 cold cathode generator, and the quiet effort by independent engineers rebuilding this technology to free themselves from the power grid entirely all point toward the same conclusion. To grasp the scale of that suppression, it is necessary to first understand the illusion shaping modern civilization. The entire utility industry survives on one central idea: energy scarcity. These monopolies must persuade the public that electrical production is an impossibly complex operation requiring massive centralized control. That is why giant power stations dominate landscapes while dangerous transmission cables stretch across entire continents. The spectacle itself reinforces the narrative. People are trained to see a power line as something essential to survival. Electricity is presented as a manufactured commodity that must be produced, transported, and sold back to consumers at a premium price. According to this view, the system functions as a coordinated psychological operation carried across generations. It becomes a worldwide mechanism of dependence and financial extraction. Behind technical language and confusing billing systems, the reality they allegedly conceal is far simpler. Human civilization exists inside a naturally occurring planetary electrical generator. The Earth carries a negative charge. High above it, the ionosphere, continuously struck by solar radiation, holds a powerful positive charge. Between those layers sits the troposphere, the atmosphere people breathe every day. The separation between these opposing charges creates a vertical electrical gradient, an enormous invisible field surrounding the entire planet. For every single meter above the surface, electrical potential rises by nearly 100 volts. A person standing outdoors experiences around a 200-volt difference between the top of the head and the feet. The utility monopolies were always aware of this phenomenon. The entire planet behaves like a massive capacitor, filled with limitless unmetered energy already moving through the environment. During the late 1920s and early 1930s, before the electrical grid became fully centralized, independent inventors and researchers were moving rapidly toward unlocking atmospheric extraction mathematics. Their objective was not to burn coal for steam production and turbine rotation. Their focus centered on tapping directly into Earth's vertical voltage gradient. The most alarming breakthrough for the rising utility monopolies arrived in 1931 with the creation of the cold cathode atmospheric generator. This was never dismissed as some fringe fantasy. The system was presented as a mathematically grounded solid-state mechanism with measurable results. Its structure was shockingly direct, and according to the narrative, that simplicity made it dangerous enough to erase. The 1931 schematics described an elevated antenna assembly built not for radio reception, but for trapping atmospheric ions. By raising a specially designed collector into open air, often a polished metallic sphere or densely woven copper screen, the apparatus could access regions with higher electrical potential. Yet the true breakthrough centered on the cold cathode vacuum tube. Traditional vacuum tubes from that era depended on heated filaments to release electrons, requiring outside electrical input. The 1931 configuration instead relied on a chemical layer applied to the cathode. In many cases, this involved radioactive materials such as radium or a specially prepared barium-strontium oxide compound that enabled electron emission without external heating. As the elevated antenna accumulated the atmosphere's high voltage and low current electrical charge, that energy traveled downward through a heavily insulated conductor into the cold cathode tube. The tube functioned like a one-direction electrical gate, operating as a high-voltage diode. It permitted atmospheric charge to pulse into a primary capacitor array, pass through a resonant transformer, and finally convert into usable, localized alternating current. According to the story, the utility monopolies immediately recognized the threat. If a homeowner could install a 20-foot copper mast in a backyard, connect a $50 cold cathode receiver, and continuously draw free electrical energy from the atmosphere, the centralized utility model would disintegrate overnight. The storage facilities containing the prototypes and detailed manufacturing plans were allegedly raided. The engineers behind the project faced public discrediting campaigns, financial destruction, patent battles, or direct buyouts. Atmospheric electricity concepts were steadily removed from academic institutions and labeled as pseudoscience. The approved narrative became absolute. Electricity originated at the power plant, and consumers would continue paying for access permanently. But according to supporters of the theory, the physics behind Earth's vertical voltage gradient could never be erased through regulation. Attention then shifted toward the mathematical structure of the technology because independent, decentralized researchers had reportedly already begun reconstructing the system using commercially available parts. The argument claimed the numbers themselves revealed why the monopolies feared the technology. The proposed energy equation for a simple atmospheric receiver was defined as E equals Vi multiplied by Q. E describes Vxq energy equaled voltage multiplied by charge. Earlier calculations established that the natural atmospheric voltage gradient measured around 100 volts for every meter of elevation. If an independent engineer erected a heavily insulated conductive copper mast standing exactly 15 meters tall, approximately 50 feet, using ordinary telescoping ham radio towers, the structure would immediately interact with a 1,500 volt potential difference compared with the grounding rod driven into the earth beneath it. 100 volts per meter, 15 meters, 1,500 volts critics. The idea insisted the fatal problem was current. The atmosphere contained extremely high voltage levels, but almost no amperage. The charge behaved more like a slow electrical trickle. A direct touch against the wire would supposedly produce almost no sensation because the current existed only within microamp levels. Defenders of the utility industry argued that a 1,500 volt source delivering only microamps could never perform meaningful work. Supporters of the suppressed technology rejected that criticism. They claimed the real power came from capacitors and spark gap systems, not from direct atmospheric current alone. One frequently cited example involved an unnamed electrical engineer operating from a densely forested compound somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. Frustrated by expanding smart meter systems and rapidly increasing utility costs, this individual allegedly abandoned the grid completely by constructing a modernized version of the 1931 blueprint. Rather than depending on dangerous radioactive cold cathode tubes controlled through heavy regulation, the engineer adopted modern ultra-high voltage solid-state diodes. These were inexpensive components commonly found inside microwave ovens and CRT television systems. He constructed a 60-foot insulated mast crowned with a carefully polished aluminum toroid. The circular donut-shaped structure was chosen to maximize surface area while minimizing corona discharge. A thick, Teflon-insulated cable connected the aerial collector to a massive homemade Leyden jar capacitor bank installed beneath the house in the basement. The 1,800 volt atmospheric trickle slowly accumulated inside the capacitors. To control the release, the system used a finely adjusted spark gap consisting of 2 tungsten electrodes positioned exactly 2 millimeters apart. Once the capacitor bank reached maximum charge, high voltage violently jumped across the spark gap. The sudden discharge then traveled into a custom-wound transformer submerged in oil. The process converted the high-voltage low-current trickle into a low-voltage high-current pulse. By carefully tuning circuit resonance, the engineer generated a continuous rapid sequence of high-energy pulses that recharged a large lithium iron phosphate battery array. The local utility company's smart meter recorded 0 electrical consumption. Inspectors arrived believing the meter had been bypassed illegally. Their investigation uncovered nothing. The property had been fully disconnected from the company's infrastructure. Using less than $300 in raw materials, mostly recycled copper, salvaged wiring, and ordinary electronic components, the system allegedly produced a continuous 400 watts of electrical power directly from the atmosphere, 24 hours each day regardless of weather conditions. According to the narrative, this explains why the energy industry aggressively suppresses atmospheric electricity concepts. Such technology bypasses the entire structure of centralized control. Air cannot be metered. The vertical voltage gradient cannot be sold back to consumers. The only remaining defense, according to supporters of the theory, is convincing the public the technology is impossible, fictional, or merely conspiracy material. They claim the monopoly survives because most people lack a basic understanding of electrostatic physics, allowing the $60 billion system to continue operating without challenge. Building an atmospheric receiver is described as an act of resistance against centralized energy dependence. The process requires careful knowledge of high-voltage safety principles, along with precise electrostatic geometry. The aerial collector must remain as smooth as possible, Sharp edges, or pointed surfaces, allow accumulated charge to escape into the air through corona discharge before traveling down the conductor. The downlead wire requires heavy insulation and must remain suspended away from the mast, so the electrical charge cannot leak back toward ground potential. The grounding network must be uncompromising. Multiple copper rods are driven deeply into damp soil and chemically treated using magnesium sulfate to maintain minimal resistance. According to the claims surrounding the system, this is not theoretical speculation. It is presented as a measurable and mathematically demonstrable reality. The centralized electrical grid is portrayed as an artificial structure, a financial prison built around a planet already saturated with electrical potential. By examining the hidden blueprints connected to the 1931 cold cathode generator, supporters believe the illusion surrounding utility monopolies disappears. The towering transmission lines and enormous substations cease to appear as symbols of technological progress. Instead, they are described as monuments to a continuing system of financial extraction. The information required to dismantle that structure is no longer hidden inside sealed archives. It now spreads through decentralized channels, one schematic at a time, one component after another. According to the narrative, the era of centralized energy monopolies is mathematically unsustainable, while Earth's vertical voltage gradient remains available for harvesting. The next investigation turns toward another allegedly suppressed technology involving a $7 chemical compound capable of restoring dead batteries. The coming discussion focuses on how the lithium-ion industry supposedly forces replacement of off-grid storage systems, and why a 1943 military logistics manual reportedly contains the hidden solution. If this information changes the way you see energy systems, continue following the investigation, because the next discovery goes even deeper into the technologies they claim were buried from public view. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.